Thank you so much. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Ni hao.
Ni hao.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here and share my work with you all today. I wanted to thank you, my friend Dr. Zeb Lee from Donghua University. He's the one who brought me here. I've been here for 5 days today, 5 days, and I'm leaving tomorrow. But he's helping me to take me to different places, introduce me to some people everywhere. So I was in Donghua yesterday, came here today. Tomorrow we'll be here again, right? And then the day after tomorrow I will leave. So today I'm going to talk about future, right? Future, but I'm not a futurist. I'm not an astrologist. I don't look at the palm. Don't get confused. Future is uncertain, right? Nobody knows about future. What's going to happen in 30 years? What's going to happen in 50 years? Nobody knows. So future is very hard thing to discuss, right? But we have to. In everything, if we don't discuss about the future, it's hard. Future about our lives. Future about education. Future about our kids. Future about the country, right? The future is something we need to discuss, which is hard. Future is fuzzy. It's hard to see what's going to happen in 30 years. Nobody knows, right? What's the life like? What the economics will be in 50 years. What the environment will be in 50 years. So it's a hard thing to talk about. So this project is, I did this project a few years ago, and I still work on these issues. So I'm going to talk about a few things here. One is resilience. Have you heard about the term resilience? How many of you heard about resilience? Okay. What comes in your mind when somebody says resilience? Strong, okay. Response. What else? Sustainable. I think somebody says here, up here. What does come to your mind when somebody says resilient? Adaptation, right? Resilient is, we'll talk about resilience, but resilience is how do we recover? If something happens, it could be going back to the previous stage or adapt to the changes, right? So resilient is something everybody needs to have. It could be individual resilience, it could be institutional resilience, it could be ecological resilience. So it could, resilience that makes anything, individual or organizations or ecosystem or country or politics strong enough, right? Somebody says strong. That's resilience, right? I'm going to talk about uncertainty. Uncertainty. So uncertainty means we don't know about future, right? How do you build resilient? How do you become resilient if future is uncertain? And then I'm going to talk about organizations. So this project is based on one of the organizations in the U.S., the land management organization. Who they manage the land. It's like a national park and forest and lakes and the timberland and everything. They manage the public land. So this is the biggest public land management organization in the United States, and I did this project for them. Let me begin with a short video, and then very short video, and then we'll discuss. It works.
We have a question before us. What is the BLM of the future? And the North Star 2025 plays a big role in helping us understand that.
North Star project is one of the unique type of project that helps agencies, especially the BLM, to think beyond what they do every day.
And what we're trying to do is say, 10 years from now, between now and then, what are the main drivers that are going to really affect the work that we do? And I don't think that in many other projects we really get that opportunity. And it really should be something that we do as a normal part of our business.
And I think it's really forward-thinking for the BLM to be projecting, to sort of be able to anticipate what might be coming down the road, what's going to be coming their way, and to better prepare themselves and to build the workforce that they need to approach the future and be a powerful force.
With the North Star 2025, we're trying to develop scenarios and forecast what we might not know, what those impacts might be on public land.
What we are expecting is coming up with not solutions but explanations. These are the explanations, these are the possible actions, these are the possible policies we can come up with to deal with the future. That's what we are expecting.
There are so many different interesting results that we're identifying within the literature. I think the technological trends they're beyond anything I can even imagine just 10 years down the road. If you look into the past 10 years, I don't think you could have ever imagined that we have the things that we do today.
Do we all know that things are changing? You know, public land resources are changing, the vegetation, the ecology out there is changing, and the only way that we're going to be able to keep up is by staying flexible. I mean, I think with a project like this, if you don't go around and ask other people and other institutions what they think about this, you're missing the boat. Those perspectives are going to alert you to things that you didn't even think about before you started the process.
The pace of change is fast, and I think thinking again about the future is the way that we do stay innovative, that we get ideas that lead towards solutions. And as we look for opportunities like renewable energy, we also have to be mindful, of our conservation mission and work hard to balance those and make sure that while we're protecting, these very important landscapes for future generations, that we're also using them wisely to make sure that we're meeting the demands of the American people.
Thank you. So you probably got some ideas, right? What this project is about. So we did this project for this organization called BLM. They came to us and asked us, help us what kind of people we should hire. Because people, you hire today will be the future leader, right? Future CEOs, future managers. And if you hire wrong people now, you'll be in different position in a few years, right? What kind of infrastructure they need to build? Where do they need to build the offices? Where do they need to build the roads? And a lot of other things. So, without understanding the future, without having a better understanding of future, it's hard to even survive in any organization, even universities, right? What's the future of universities? Let's say if there are fewer and fewer, people. Younger people in the future, what's the role of universities, right? I think we are facing these issues in the United States too. There are fewer and fewer younger people. The population is different. There are more older people than younger people. So these are some of the things we need to discuss. We need to be open. We need to be cognizant of some of the global trends, so that we can make our decision, we can make plan wisely, right? So this project is a big project. I had opportunity to lead with the project, but we had several faculty from different departments. Some of them were natural scientists, biologists, social scientists, economists, and students as well. I had 4 graduate, undergraduate students working on the project, and one of the students was on the video. And we also had a few team members from this BLM organization called Bureau of Land Management. Let's talk about the past and the present, right? Look at what happened within the last 100 years, 150 years. This used to be our transportation. Now this is our transportation. Amazon is delivering goods by drone, right? This used to be how people used to travel. Now we have driverless car on the street. They are testing driverless car on my street in Arizona. So believe it or not, 10, 15 years from now, there will be a lot of driverless car on the street. Imagine how things will change when there will be driverless car on the street. Can you imagine? Do you know what's going to happen when there will be driverless car on the street? There are need drivers, right? There are need truck drivers. Where do they go? The job will be gone. There won't be any taxi drivers. There won't be any parking places in cities. The cities make a lot of money from these, from the parking space, right? And the individuals too, the investment. What do they do? Because if there is a driverless car, the car will come and drop you off at your work or school or wherever you want to go, and then go to the place where the parking is the cheapest. There's no need to park here in downtown, right? So that will change the whole thing. Will change the economy, change the investment, change the revenue for cities, individuals, and all sorts of things. So think about just a small thing, how much changes it can bring, right? So this is just the technological part, right? Just technological part. Think about how things change within the last 10, 15 years, right? When I was doing my PhD, there was no Facebook, right? Now, if I say Facebook, probably this is the most common term people know these days. There is nobody in the world who probably doesn't know Facebook, right? Most of the people, they know what Facebook is. Within how many years? Within 15 years. Like there are billions and billions of users of Facebook. Did anybody expect this will happen? Probably not. Did you expect social media will be this much influential 15 years ago? Probably not. People were very skeptical in the beginning. Now everybody's following, right? You make friends through Facebook, you advertise through Facebook, you purchase things through Facebook, you do a lot of things using Facebook and other social media, right? So these are just the technological changes, but there are other changes as well. Changes in economy, changes in environment, changes in politics. We were talking about politics earlier. So what's going to be politics like 50 years from now, right? Have you ever thought about it? Probably not, right? We are just thinking about today, not really the future. So look at you are probably master's, undergraduate, PhD students in economics, right? You have seen these curves, seen these trends, I'm sure, right? This is the population curve. The world population in 1750 was less than 1 billion. Do you know how much people are there in the world now? More than 7 billion, right? More than 7 billion. Within last, how many? 250 years, the population grew by 700%, right? 7 times, more than 7 times, actually 10 times, right? Population grew by 10 times within the last 250 years. Do you think in 250 years there will be 10 times more people? Do you think yes or no? No, right? Answer is no. But how do you project the future based on this trend? How do you project? You are economists, right? Can you project the population in 250 years?
Probably using birth rate and GDP and other factors.
But it's complicated, right? It's complicated. Look at the real GDP, how GDP grew within the last 250 years. From almost $200 trillion to over $60 trillion within the last 250 years, right? Look at the foreign investment. Look at the urban population. Urban population grew, from few hundred million to 3 billion, right? Energy use, fertilizer use, large dams, water use, paper production, transportation, telecommunication, international tourism. Can you predict future based on these graphs? It's hard, right? It's hard. The common thing about this graph is this. It's a J curve, right? Everything is growing like this. And what's going to be like in 250 years? We don't know, right? So, but the thing is, we are making a lot of decisions today for the future without knowing the future, right? If there are 5 roads, and we are here and we don't know where to go, right? And it's a tricky because if we make decision today based on some of the projection and it fails. That happens a lot of times. The forecast, are wrong many times. In terms of economy, in terms of population, in terms of disease, all sorts of things. Right? We make forecasts, and sometimes these forecasts they go wrong. Do you know the reason? The reason is we always based on historical data, right? We always based on the historical data, and the future is not just the repetition of the history, right? That's why most of the time we make forecasts and it goes wrong. And when you go deeper into the time horizon, the future is even more uncertain. 10 years from now, probably we can say what happens, but 100 years, almost impossible. 500 years, nobody knows, right? But we make a lot of decisions today based on future projection. We build roads, we build infrastructure, we build universities. A lot of things we do today will impact the future, right? So this project is called Northeast Star 2025. The purpose of having this name 2025 means we are thinking about 10 years and beyond, not tomorrow, right? The goal of this project was to think about the future, a little bit deeper into the future, not near future. So this organization called Bureau of Land Management. They manage a lot of lands. If you look at the map of America, this is. Does it work? Is there? Okay. Okay. So there are, look at this part of the U.S. Not many public lands. There are a lot of public lands here in the western part. This is California. This is Arizona. This is where I am in Phoenix. If you look at New York and Pennsylvania, these places, there are not many public lands. A lot of people live a lot of people live here, and people live here in California too. But there are a lot of public lands. There are many national parks and forests and a lot of public lands in this area, right? So BLM is one of the organizations, but there are other organizations who manage the land. The Bureau of Land Management is the biggest one. There is Forest Management, Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, and other agencies who manage the land. And the BLM alone, they manage 28 times the size of Taiwan, right? They manage a lot of land in the continental U.S. and Alaska. And look at some of the states. For example, in Nevada, 76% land is managed by 2 agencies, Forest Service and the BLM. So they have a lot of public lands. Only 25% private land. The rest of the land is public land. So these organizations, especially the BLM, is very important because they have the land they manage is used for mining, used for recreation, used for timber production, for a lot of other things. And the future economy will depend on these lands and what they do, right? It's very important. The concept they use is the multiple land use policy. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with natural resource management, but they have a multiple use policy. So they use the land for different things, grazing, mining, conservation. They have 10,000 employees in this organization. It's a huge 10,000 employees, right? It's a big organization. So what we're trying to do with this project was to find out what will impact the agency. What are the things that will impact the agency? Look at different factors, different trends, external trends, right? And also build resilient policies that will help them to decide the future and then come up with some strategies. So that was the main goal. So what we did was we did 3 different things. First we looked at the trend analysis. Trend analysis is looking at different factors, looking at the water use, looking at the value of public lands, looking at technology, looking at demographics. We look at different trends that will impact the agency, right? And the second thing we did was we looked at the internal resilience. How resilient is the organization? Who works for the organization? Who are these people? What are the skills they have? How resilient is the workforce? How resilient is the organization? Right? That will decide how they adapt in the future. And then we also did scenario planning at the end to build the organization a little bit more resilient, to think about the future. So as I said before, the concept of resilience is not new. The concept came from material science, engineering, mathematics, and when you try to bend a piece of metal, the metal tries to go back to the same position, right? When you bend the metal, it goes like this, right? And sometimes it goes like this. If you bend too much, it's gonna break, right? If it breaks, the system collapses. If it goes back, that the material is resilient enough, right? That concept can be applied in anything, right? It can be applied in ecological sciences. For example, if there is a fire in the forest, the whole forest will change and be replaced by different plants and different animals, or the forest will try to go back to the same position, right? If the forest is resilient enough, they will probably, the ecology will be recovered in few years, right? If it's not resilient, the ecosystem will collapse and replaced by different vegetation, right? That's ecological resilience. The organizations are like that too. Organizations, they have some changes. Some of the changes could be very slow changes. Some of the changes could be like some events. There might be earthquake, there might be flooding, there might be other natural disasters, there could be human-made disasters. But there are some slow changes. Slow changes like technology, economy, politics. These are the slow changes that's going to happen, right? So how organizations adapt, is important. How many of you have heard about the company called Kodak? Kodak company. Have you heard about Kodak company? They used to make camera and film and everything. Kodak. Have you heard about that? Yeah. Have you seen anything about Kodak recently? No. Kodak is gone. Like when I was growing up, every camera, the reel used to be Kodak. You can't even print pictures without having Kodak. Is that Kodak? No. Okay. No. This is only museum. The Kodak is left only in the museum now. Do you know why? I went to the museum, Kodak Museum, where they started Kodak in New York, called Rogers. One of the places in New York, I went to the museum, and there was a point. I think it's early 2000. They were making big decisions. There were more digital cameras coming out, and the Kodak is based on the print. All the printed thing, right? So, there were more digital cameras coming, and then they were making big decisions whether they should go to digital or stay with print, right? And there was a meeting, and in that meeting they say, we're going to stay in the print because the digital camera will not replace the print camera or print photos. A lot of people who were in that position, CEOs and leaders, they said, this digital camera will come and go, but the print will stay. People will still use the print pictures in their albums, and that will stay forever. And they made that decision, and then in a few years they collapsed because they were replaced by digital cameras and they couldn't keep up. Right? So one simple decision can happen, and that decision can make one company bankrupt. Think about that, because the company was not adaptive. They were not seeing what's going to happen next. They didn't see the future of photography, right? That's why they were collapsed. And that's the organization resilience. The organization was not resilient enough, right? So what makes organization resilience? I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but let's talk about some of the factors we looked at. When you think about future, I'm talking about the Kodak camera, which is kind of technology, but there are many other things that will impact any agencies, any companies, any organizations, right? Water use. What's the future of water? Water would be the most scarce resource in the future, fresh water, because we have limited fresh water, but the need is growing, right? We need more and more water. So that's one of the factors for the future. The people are saying the future water will be based on water, because water is very, very valuable resource. Demographics. Demographics is important because people decide, right? Who lives where, what generation people, what generation, that will decide the future, right? People are migrating in different places. Demographics is changing, and that is important to understand. And people have different values. People with different cultures have different values, and that impacts any organization, any company, any agencies. Economics is important. You are a student of economics. Economics is important, right? So what the future, what the future of economy will decide what we'll be doing, right? What are the jobs? Probably you will study where the jobs are, right? If there is, if the economy grows like this, we're going to do a lot of things what we are doing today, but we never know, right? It's one of the important factors. These days people, travel, they do a lot of recreation, tourism, and that's going to decide future as well, right? Especially the agencies like the land management agencies. The value of public lands. Public lands used to be used only for timber and things like that. Now the public lands are used for different purpose, right? There is something called ecosystem services. So they produce oxygen, they produce clean air, clean water, and things like that. These are becoming more important than in the past. In the past we were just thinking about natural resources, but now looking at the resources which are non-market resources. I'm sure if you heard about this term in economics, non-market goods and services, right? So these are the new goods and services that will impact how we manage land. Workforce. It's interesting, because my generation and my previous generation and future generation and your generation, it's all different. I think, my generation and before, they used to have just one job and they will be happy with that job. And they will retire from the same job they started. That's not going to happen with your generation, right? And younger people, they change their jobs very frequently. And how do you manage an organization based on that workforce? You can't assume the same thing, right? They have different values. People don't work, I'm not sure about, trend in Taiwan because I've not done this study, but in the US, the millennials, which are the younger people, they have different values. They don't work for organizations, they don't seem like they are, related to the organization. They have ethics, right? A lot of people, they don't work for the companies, they don't think like it's doing anything good for the society. They are not just working for paychecks. They have different values when they go for workforce. I think my generation was different. You study whatever the jobs are, you go and work wherever the money is. But younger generation, they are not after money. They have certain different values. I'm not sure if you agree with me with that. The data generation, there's so much data, right? There's so much data. I'm sure you heard about big data, right? So how do you use that data? That's going to define how you manage organization. And communication and media, these things are changing. There used to be, when I was growing up, there used to be only magazines or newspapers you read every morning, you listen to the radio, but now who listens to the radio? Nobody. Do you read newspapers? Anybody reads newspaper here? Probably not. I do sometimes, right? But most of the time we get our news from social media. It's changing. Things are changing, right? We analyze everything. We looked at how these things, how this trend will impact the organization. And we also did internal survey. We looked at there are 500 employees, they work for BLM in Arizona, in my state. And we surveyed the employees. We asked them a bunch of questions to identify where are the gaps, what kind of skills they have, what are the kind of skills they need for future, where are the gaps, and also we looked at how they think about the organization. Do they think the organization is resilient enough? Do they think the organization is flexible? Do they think they will stay in the same organization? So we asked them a lot of questions, but what makes the organization resilient is the leadership. If the leadership is not strong, the organization is not strong, right? The culture of organization is important. If the culture is not flexible, it's not healthy culture. It's not the working condition is not healthy. Then the organization cannot be resilient. Is the organization prepared to manage the risk? If something happens, how quickly the organization can recover from these changes? That's important too. And we asked them a lot of questions about the personal traits. Personal traits are one of the skills they have. Occupational skills, there are engineers, there are biologists, there are economists, there are social scientists. A lot of people, they work for the organization. And we looked at what are the skills they have, what are the skills they think they require for the future. That they need technical skills, they need communication skills, critical thinking skills. So we analyzed a lot of the skills related questions. And we also asked them organizational questions. What are the organizational traits? Working environment, flexibility, shared sense of purpose and mission and vision and things like that as well. We also asked them some demographic questions. Demographic questions related to how many years they work for the organization. Are they baby boomers? Are they Generation X, Generation Y? Different generations have different values, as I said before. We also asked them their management level. Are they managers? Are they workers? Different level of management. And some of them work in district office. Some of them work in field office. We asked them those questions as well. Oops. Some of the findings, I'm going to just show you a few slides, I'm not going to in detail, but what we found out is interesting. These people, employees, they think they have all the skills they need. Out of 5, it's a 4.15, so pretty high, right? They have all the skills they need, but the organizational traits is very low. It's out of 5, only 2.75. And organizational adaptability is low as well, 2.78. So what we learned from this is, employees think they are adaptive, they are skilled, but the organization is not adaptive. Isn't that funny? Those people who work for organization, they are skilled, they are adaptive, they have everything, but they don't think the organization is not adaptive. Have you ever thought about that? We always assume if we hire the best people in the organization, that makes the organization the best, right? Based on this, no. Do you know why? Why is that? Why? They hire the best people. They think they have all the skills they need. They have all adaptability skill, critical thinking and communication skill and everything, but they still think the organization is not adaptive. I think that's the question we asked. That's the question we asked ourselves. What makes the organization weaker in terms of resilience?
The individual didn't feel satisfied with the organization.
Exactly. So the question is, individuals are adapting, they are skilled, they're okay with their job, but the organization is not flexible. Organization's mission is not flexible. The leadership is not there, right? So that's why they need to work on organization, not just the individual. Most of the times, if organization is not resilient, what they do is they train employees. That's not going to help based on this. The organization has to change itself, right? They has to change. They have to not just train individuals and make them skillful, right? We did a little bit further analysis and looked at how about different cohort, different age group. Maybe older generation and younger generation, they have a different way of thinking about organizational adaptability and organizational resilience. And we found something really interesting here. So baby boomers, which are older people, people born between 1946 and 64, they are called baby boomers because they were born right after World War, and then they were growing up in the secure time. A lot of people were born during that period of time, right? And Generation X is people born between 1965 and 1984. They are Generation X, and Generation Y is probably you guys, right? People born after 1984. So we asked the same question, but the baby boomers, they are even less hopeful, right? They are, out of 5, they think the organization is only adaptability is only 2.5, right? Compared to other 2 generations. So those people who are retiring, they don't think the organization is doing well, which is kind of concerning, right? Those people who are retiring, they don't feel like organization is resilient enough. So, what are some of the things we found out from that survey was, employees' skills did not predict the organizational resilience because they were skilled, but the resilience was not, it's not correlated, right? So it didn't help to predict the organizational resilience. But what helped to predict the organizational resilience is organizational traits. Safe, secure working environment, thinking beyond status quo, including the right people in decisions, effective long-term planning. These things make organization more adaptive and more resilient. That's what they thought. And large organizations like this, the BLM, what they need to do is not just hire the best people, train them, but engage them. There was no engagement. They didn't feel sense of security. They didn't feel sense of, they didn't feel they were part of the organization, right? So that's why the organization resilience was very low. And the last thing we did something which we thought would help the organization resilience. It's called scenario planning. Anybody heard about scenario planning? What is it? Can anybody guess? What is scenario planning? Anybody done scenario planning here? No?
Quite of different scenarios.
Different scenarios. Okay.
Scenario.
Scenario planning, you can do scenario planning in different ways. One is very mathematical scenario planning, modeling, right? You look at, let's say economics, you look at climate change, you look at workforce, and then model the scenarios. Very quantitative mathematical scenarios. The other one is more qualitative scenarios, right? So the scenario planning we did was more qualitative type of scenario, the bigger macro level scenarios. So scenario planning is a systematic tool to predict, to talk about the future, to think about the future. So it's very strategic. That helps to be a little bit more creative, right? So what we do in scenario planning, we look at the drivers of uncertainty. What makes anything uncertain, right? So now we're trying to understand, with the scenario planning process, we're trying to understand what are the drivers, what are the factors that makes future uncertain. At least we can, if we can identify these factors, that can help, right? How will these factors, these drivers or factors impact us? You know, these factors could be anything. Could be technology, could be demographics, could be economy, could be environment, you know, anything, right? And how did factors impact us? What are the scenarios based on these factors? You know, if, let's say, economy is bad, you know, what are the scenarios based on bad economy? If the environment is really bad, you know, climate change will hit the maximum, you know, 2.5 degree temperature rise, what's going to happen, right? So you can build scenarios based on these factors. And what policies and strategies you need to adapt to these scenarios when that happens, right? If you have these plans, that can help a lot, right? If you know there will be a next recession in a year or two, and you plan now, if recession happens, these are the policies we need, these are the strategies we need, that help a lot than just waiting for economy to collapse and then work on those policies, right? And then what it does is it just, you know, helps people to think beyond everyday life. Think about, you know, it challenges the status quo. You know, we always think about tomorrow will be like yesterday or today. That's not going to happen, right? Tomorrow will be a different day. So that just, you know, challenges people to think, you know, a little bit, you know, more. And also it stimulates strategic thinking. So it makes people to think a little more strategically. I'm sure you're thinking about this, you know, what's going to happen, what kind of job I need to go, you know, what are the areas I need to focus on, you know, that's you know, how people would think, you know, when we talk about future a lot, you will be a little bit more strategic. And this is not the technique I came up with, right? I didn't invent this tool. This tool was invented mostly by defense. You know, in military context, this is used a lot because the defense is the most uncertain things because you never know, right? Your military strategy will be based on your enemies that you don't know, right? You don't know your enemies, and you have to make your move based on your action based on the enemies. How do you do that? Because you know, that's why they need to have some scenarios. You know, what are the scenarios A, B, C, D, E? You know, they have to have multiple scenarios. If they do this, we're going to do this. They will do this, we're going to do this. You know, you have to have some scenarios. So in military context, they use scenario planning a lot. But more recently, the Fortune 500 companies, big companies, they use scenarios because they need to do scenarios. Otherwise, they will be like Kodak, right? They will be like Kodak company. They can't survive. Every car company in the US and everywhere else, they are investing on driverless car, right? Because that's the future. If they don't do that, they won't survive tomorrow. So they are looking at, they're investing, you know, even if there are no driverless car on the street yet, you know, they are still testing, they're investing a lot of money, right? The car companies, they are investing on you know, more energy efficient cars, right? Tesla, you know, they run by batteries. You know, that's where they are investing because they see the future will be there, right? So these are all strategic, strategic, planning, right? This is all not just making profit today, but where the future will be, so that they invest today for the future. And these are all Fortune 500 companies. They, most of them, they use scenario planning. Otherwise, they can't survive. So what we did was we did 2 days of scenario planning workshop for this organization, BLM, right? One day we spent talking about more social issues, how the social issues will impact the organization, what are the scenarios, and next day we did more, biological aspect, more natural resource aspect of scenario planning, and then we invited, when you do scenario planning, we invited the best people possible, right? Who can think, a little bit more strategically, who are experts in that, field. So we invited, a lot of people, social scientists, natural scientists, the people who work for the organization, leadership team, and other stakeholders as well. And our goal, in this scenario planning process is to develop scenarios. What are the scenarios, so that at least they are prepared for the future. Right? And we did this workshop. We have something called decision theater. So it's like a room like this, but it's a different setup. We have 9, 10 different computers like this around the room. You can look at, you can have a computer modeling. You can show these things, trends, quickly whenever there is a need, right? So, if somebody talks about, climate change is the biggest, factor that will impact us, we just look at climate change and how it will impact us, right? So, that just helps policymakers plans to think and plan visually. It's instead of just talking about theoretical stuff, you can actually look at it visually. At least the past and the future modeling as well, if there is any data. So this is the room. You can see the computer screens around, and we are very engaged. They were very engaged. We spent almost a day building scenarios. So, first question, this is very simple process, but you have to do a lot of homework, right? We came up, we asked them this question first. What factors will affect the future of BLM's goal to protect and manage natural resources? There were 12, 15 people in the room, all experts. We asked them, and then they wrote. Some people wrote, technology. Some people wrote climate change. Some people wrote, demographics, economics, all sorts of things, right? And then we went around the table, and then people started explaining them. How economy will impact the future of BLM, how technology will impact the future of BLM. So we had 60, 70 different factors, different drivers that will impact the organization in the future, right? What do you do with those drivers? What do we do with these factors? And we had a lot of discussion in the room to discuss these factors. And what we did was we created this matrix called Wilson matrix. So we have this importance, one axis, the other axis is uncertainty, right? And within importance, this is high importance, this is low importance, this is high uncertain, low uncertain. Out of all these factors, we put them in different quadrants, right? Let's say demographics. Some people say, how people migrate to different places, different cultures and different generations that will impact the organization. Where does that fit within this matrix? Is it highly uncertain? Is it highly important? Or it's somewhere here or here or here? So we had a lot of discussion to decide where does each trend or each factor will fit, right? And our goal is to look at here. Our goal is to look at what factors are most important and highly uncertain. Because let's say technology is very important. But if you know certainly that there will be driverless car on the street, or there will be more technology, and if you can predict the technology, that's easy to deal with, right? But let's focus on something that it's hardest to deal with, most important and most uncertain. That's our focus during the scenario planning process. So you can see some of the things here. It's hard to read, but climate change, funding, political landscape, public, it's hard to see, public perception, big data, and there are a bunch of things here, right? So we have so many factors. We're trying to figure out, within the workshop, what are the factors which are most uncertain and high importance. It's a long discussion. People say social media is uncertain, digital technology is uncertain, emotional connection to the land is uncertain, shared economy will change, the Uber and Airbnb and these things, shared economy, the safety and security, politics. These are all uncertain things. But our goal was to identify two factors which are most uncertain and most important. Right? If you have two factors, you can have 4 scenarios. If you have 3 factors, you will have 8 scenarios. If you have 4 factors, there will be 16 scenarios. So the goal here is to make it simple, right? If you have 2 most important factors and most uncertain factors, at least you can have only 4 scenarios. And 4 scenarios is pretty easy to handle. But if you have 16 scenarios, that's very hard, right? So our goal in this process was, not to have more than 2 factors, so that we can have only 4 scenarios. Make sense? So, once we identify, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but once we identify 2 most important and highly uncertain factors, we develop the scenarios. What's going to look like in each of these 4 scenarios. So once you build up these scenarios, you have to write a story. You have to make a narrative. Otherwise, future is boring. Talk about future is boring. But if you try, it's like making movies. We're trying to write a story based on these factors. 50 years from now, the world will be like this. We created different plots, different scenarios, and then write a story. Imagine and make event and write the story so that it's easy to understand. So based on the whole process, we spent 3 or 4 hours, and this is what we came up with, right? Out of all these factors we discussed, technology, demographics, economy, environment, and everything, people thought, the whole group came up with 2 most important and highly uncertain factors. One is how public will support public lands, right? Public support is one of the most important things. If they don't support, that's a whole different things, right? The other axis is political polarization, how the politics will play, right? Political polarization is how different parties come together and work. If they are separate, they don't work together, that impacts the public land, organization like the BLM. So out of all these are the 2 most important factors the group came up with, not me. They're not the researcher, but the group came up with these factors. All the experts came up with these factors. So I'm going to ask you a question here, okay? This is high public support. This is high political polarization, right? High public support is pretty good, right? The public support, public lands, the forest and park and everything. It's pretty good. If public support, they will get more funding. High political polarization is the parties, they fight each other a lot. They don't come to a consensus. They just don't do much work done, basically, right? Low political polarization is, they agree with a lot of things. They don't fight too much. They do a lot of work. So that's low political polarization. Low public support is public don't like, public lands. They don't support the funding and this stuff like that, right? Which one you think is the best scenarios? Based on these 4 quadrants, which quadrant is the best scenario? This one, A, B, C, D. A is high support, low political polarization, right? B is high support, public support, high political polarization. C is low political polarization, low public support. and D is high political polarization but low public support. Which one is the best? A is the best? How many of you think A is the best? Okay, you're right. A is the best scenario. So we name this scenario as utopian scenarios, right? This is the scenario everybody wants to have, but that's not going to happen all the time, right? So this is the best that can happen in the future, based on these two scenarios. Which one is the worst? Opposite, right? This is the doomsday scenario. This is the worst scenario. If you look at the American politics now, we are here. Probably I would say here. There is a very high political polarization, right? Actually, a lot of the BLM lands, they are reduced. There is not much funding, there is not much public support. There's a lot of things happening. We did right before the election in 2015, 16. So this is important. Let's look at what's going to happen in each scenario, right? We did this 4 years ago. In utopian scenarios, there will be more lands added to public space, right? More transparent decision making, highly informed public, co-management increase, more sustainability network, framework will be used. There will be more inclusive decision making, less litigation, less fighting in the court for the for the sake of public lands, more reuse and restoration, high morale of employees, right? More resources available. So these are better recruitment. So there are more younger employees, they want to work for an organization, right? If the organization is, they get a lot of funding, they get public support, there is political support, everybody wants to work for an organization, right? That's a utopian scenario. Look at the doomsday scenario, the worst scenario. Nobody wants to work for an organization if this happens, right? Because there's not much funding, there's not much public support. You deal with all sorts of issues. So who wants to work for the organization who is going through all these problems? Nobody, if there is an option, right? So in this scenario, there's a lack of funding, lack of resources, poor or no decision making. Public lands are at risk because they will lose public lands. There is not much public support, loss of public trust, increased litigation. So there are all the worst scenarios here, right? And then there are some in between as well. So what we did next was we looked at, okay, these are the 4 scenarios. It's a very simple, right? We have only 2 factors. We have 4 scenarios. Now look at the policies. What policies they have and how these policies will play a role if these scenarios happens. Everybody wants the best scenarios, but best scenario does not happen all the time, right? So you have to be prepared. You have to look at the policies, that works for different scenarios. So we looked at what policies will, are resilient enough. What policies they need in each scenarios. What kind of actions they need for each scenario. So we looked at short-term, medium-term, and long-term strategy based on these scenarios. So we developed these actions during that workshop and after workshop as well. So finally, we created a report. Now we have 3 things. One is we have the trend analysis. We have the employee survey. We identified the employees are very skillful, but the organization is not adaptive. And we also did scenario planning. And based on this, the organization, they made their plan. 2017, they will do, 18 they will do this, 19 they will do this. So the decision they make today will impact the future, right? This is their strategy to deal with the future, to become more and more resilient. And then they are trying to implement those ideas, trying to make organizations more resilient. But how do they do that? They're trying to create more kind of think tank within the organization. They do everything, their job, but how do you make their organization more resilient? People feel the organization has the values. They feel they can work for. The mission is adaptive and things like that. So we provided a lot of recommendations for them, and then they've been working on a lot of these things to make them more resilient as a learning organization. So it's not an easy task because big bureaucratic organization they don't want to change, right? But they have to, otherwise they will be like a company, right? So with this. So what we learned from this is two things. One is they have all these outputs, all these outcomes from this report, and the other thing is the process itself. The process was learning process. They felt they know a lot of things because when we did the scenario planning, some people said they feel like they work for Fortune 500 companies because. They feel like they're talking about future, they're looking at analyzing the future trends, so that makes them a little bit more comfortable working for the organization, right? And the scenario planning, it works really well if you know what the issues you're dealing with, right? And this is very useful technique. You can do scenario planning, very simple thing or very complex thing, right? With that, thank you so much. I'll be happy to answer your questions if you have any. Thank you.
Any? No question?
I think there are questions, yes.
I was wondering, first, thank you for this, your speech. I was really interested about all the talk. I was thinking about how it's possible that people who belong to organizations say, I am competent or I am resilient, and the organization itself is not. I mean, what is the concept that they have? What organization is? Because I think the organization is like the sum of individuals.
Yes.
If I say the organization is not resilient, I'm thinking about the board members, thinking about the head of the organization. What's implied this kind of?
That's a very good question. Thank you for this question. I think this puzzles people, right? This puzzles people because organization is a group of people, right? If the group of people is strong, the organization should be strong. But what we found is the contrary, right? Group of people makes organization, but the mission of the organization is not built by this group of people. The mission of the organization is made by somebody else, right? So the employees, they have to part of that process. They have to be engaged, right? They should have ownership of the organization. They should feel like this is our mission, not just somebody's mission. I think this is very important for not just public organization, but private organization as well, right? If the employees, they don't feel like they are part of organization, it doesn't matter how skillful they are. They don't feel secure. They don't feel the organization is doing enough. Make sense? So I think what they're trying to do is, how do they get employees' input? Employees are not just worker bees. They are human beings. They are part of the organization. And unless they feel like they are part of the organization, doesn't matter how productive the employees are.
But how do we improve the resilience in organization? As we asked, how do we improve?
I think what they are trying to do is doing something different, bringing employees in the process, engage them in the process. When they are making decisions should not be made by the CEO or the manager. So you have to involve the employees in that process, so they feel like, okay, this is what's going to happen in 10 years. Let's figure it out. Not just hire somebody from outside, and then employees will implement this plan, but also involve them during the planning process, so that they feel ownership, they feel engaged. As head of the department, you can make all sorts of policies, but the people who work for you, they have to accept these policies, right? They have to feel like this is we need to do. Otherwise, people don't follow you, right? So I think that's where the point was missing. Employees, they are working, they are doing their best. They had all these skills, but organization didn't have that adaptability.
So instead of have this kind of scenario meeting or workshop to make the employee feel they are part of the institution
Exactly.
or organization,
Yeah.
if there any other way we can do to help?
I think one is the employee engagement, but there are some, we recommended some other strategies too, right? The one is make them feel like, some of them were very, very engaged, some of them were very excited, the employees when we were doing this project, because they would see organization is doing something, right? We're not just sitting there and waiting for the disaster to take place. We are, they are there, to think about the future. They are there to think about, what they can do, because people, young people, and even the people who are experienced, they want to improve the organization they work for, right? And if they are engaged in that process, they will feel like they can do a lot of things. And what we are trying to do is, repeat this survey again in few years. And they are doing a lot of things now. There's something called 10X Lab. 10X Lab is like a think tank within the organization. So we have a group of people within the organization who, who come to the lab and discuss about things, which are out of their box, out of box thinking. Talk about something weird, right? It's not directly related to they do every day, but think about something interesting. Think about the future war. How war will impact the organization, how the water crisis will impact the organization, how the economy will impact the organization. Think about something beyond everyday life. Right? That makes employees a little bit more exciting, stimulating. Those are the things they are trying to do. And then scenario planning itself is helpful, so they have something to work on. If today's scenario is not the best scenario, right? So they can actually look at the book and see, oh, this is happening now.
After the workshop, is there any significant change for the baby boomer group? Because they're not so satisfied with their position? So
we did look at how they change, because we have not repeated that survey yet. But I think what we found out interesting is, if you go to any organization and tell them your organization is not doing well, there will be a resistance, right? You are head of the department and I come and say your department is not doing well. That's not a good news, right? And you don't want to hear that, right? There's a baby boomers, that generation is a little bit more resistant to some of the things we are doing, right? Because they don't want to be changed. We are seeing that technology will replace a lot of things they are doing. They have to be technologically more adaptive, but that generation didn't want to be very, very adaptive, right? So we didn't measure how they changed, but I'm sure this process helped them to change a little bit, at least. No questions?
No question. Any question?
Oh wow,
Yeah.
you can ask.
Okay, I'm curious about, I come from a poor country, I would say that, I don't care. And we use from the academia say that kind of thing, that the government need to plan ahead, have a plan like planning these scenarios for future, but sometimes in poor countries, the one government do it, but the next one just
Just
take away,
ignore it, right?
ignore it, all the other government are doing. Now I'm curious about what's happening in USA about all these political issues, and this is really changing the scenario over there. So, do you think they are going to follow all the recommendations for a long period, let's say 10 years?
I think the politics is very, very important thing. Even if we don't talk about politics every day, that's very, very important thing. That's what we found out from this process. We can talk about economy, we can talk about environment, we can talk about all sorts of things, but politics is one of the most important things that will change everything, right? I think that's what's happening in the United States now. We can do all kind of research in universities, all kind of things in universities, but if we choose somebody who doesn't believe in science, that's gonna just erase everything, right? So I think my point is, we have to be, as an individual, as a citizen, as a student, as a faculty or anybody, we should look at, what are the important things we do will impact us. I think one is the vote. If you don't vote, somebody will vote. Somebody will impact your life, right? I tell everybody, politics is something very, very important, very, very important. And we came up with the same finding. It doesn't matter, how the economy does and how environment does and everything, but somebody can, if we choose, a person versus another person, that's going to change the whole thing, right? The mass scale, the larger scale, right? So, but one thing I found interesting is, if you build the institution resilient, that can help a lot, right? I think institutions in the United States, they are very resilient. If you look at the cities and states, they are doing fine in any scenarios, right? Because they are strong, they are independent. I'm sure you are following the news, but that news, is not impacting everyday's life. I'm still working. The universities are doing everything they are doing because the institutions have to be strong. Otherwise, one or two people can impact the whole thing. Make sense?
So if the institution is strong, does this mean we don't need a strong leader?
I think the strong leader is important, but if we rely on just one leader and institutionally we are weak, the leader can be dictator. Leader can destroy the institution, right? I think institution should be resilient enough to deal with unexpected things, right?
But if a detector can make the organization or institution strong, what's wrong with that? It's good, huh?
It's good, if the dictator helps the institution to be stronger, probably the dictator doesn't want the institution to be strong, because that will go against the dictator, right?
Then for the long term.
Maybe the dictator wants institution to be on his or her favor, not necessarily the favor of in everybody's mind, right? That's what dictatorship is. Dictatorship is, I have certain things and I don't listen to anybody. I have the power and I use my power for my purpose. That's dictatorship, right? They're not looking at people. They're not looking at others. They're just looking at themselves. Themselves, their life, their family, and everything. That's what dictatorship is, I believe, right? You have a question?
I was just thinking about the idea that since institutions are supposed to be very resilient, but we live in a time where there's so much change.
Yeah.
And I'd say that maybe some of the baby boomers, their way that they feel it's primarily because they're used to this core values that have been installed before we got to this era. So how about if we maybe say that whilst we maintain these core values, we should also be a bit fluid in trying to cater for, to understand that it's not going to be like we mentioned status quo, business as usual, because there is a slight change. To maybe bring a small example, we mentioned the idea of Tesla with the battery motors and running that like that. Whilst for the very, should I say, very right-wing fundamentalists, they wouldn't want to use any car that doesn't use fuel.
Yeah.
But really thinking about it in the long term, we are going to need those cars. So institutions like maybe GM Motors or whatever car manufacturers, they might want to start thinking about that. Even though we are hardcore, this is our mission, but we have to allow ourselves to be just a bit fluid to say we need to adapt in this way.
Yeah.
Would that be a correct statement?
I think your point is very valid. It's very, very important. I think this is what we found out in our research as well. Organizations, they have their policies, they have their strategies. Anything. BLM could be BLM, could be private institution. They have to have some flexibility. If they don't have flexibility, they can't survive. They can't survive. There should be a way to, if it could be, the changes could be two different kind of changes, right? One would be very slow change, one could be abrupt change, right? There should be adaptive in both scenarios. If there is, big change tomorrow, if there is a world war or there is earthquake, anything, right? Organizations, they have to have that kind of fluid policy. What if half of the employees leave tomorrow? What if everybody resigns tomorrow? Those kind of things. There should be some flexibility in terms of how do they manage the institution, who they hire, what policies they have, so that they can use that book when something happens. But that's a really, really good point. I think a lot of organizations, they are too rigid to change, and that is very risky. Very, very risky. And especially the big bureaucratic organization. When they are too big, they are less flexible. Right? Good point. Any more questions?
How about the size of the organization? The smaller size organization, maybe they are more resilient organization. If the organization became too big, right, they were lost.
I think you can look at both ways. One is fewer people might be effective in terms of having ownership, become flexible, but at the same time, bigger organizations have more resources. Right? Bigger organizations have more resources. They can hire and fire easily, and they can hire expertise they need easily. If they need a lot of computer scientists tomorrow, they have the resources to hire these people. A smaller organization, if they have only 10 employees and all of them have a background in something, they're not critical thinkers, they don't have much flexibility in terms of resources, right? So I don't think we analyze small versus large organizations, but that's something to think about too. I think large organizations are our focus was looking at larger public organizations.
Right, because usually we are talking about some optimal size, right? If some institution became
too big, yeah.
They lost their flexibility.
Exactly.
The smaller one has more flexibility, but it's opposite, so you can compromise.
Yeah, exactly.
In some place.
I think that concept could be applied. How do we, if the organization is too big, what do we do? How do we divide that organization? Maybe, right? If the organization has 10,000 employees, maybe you can divide that organization so that they would feel a little bit of ownership. Have 500 500 employees managed by one person. One vice president or vice CEO or something, right? So I think they do that with bigger private companies, right? So they have their different divisions, so that the division is a little bit more manageable than having 100,000 people working for just under one CEO. It's a good point. That's something you can work on. More questions?
Very quiet.
No more questions? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gyan. I think